Okay, here is the mixing demo for the Color Still Life, the yellow and blue object Color Still Life. Let's begin by reviewing the colors that we have on our palette today. This is cadmium yellow, this is yellow ochre, this is burnt umber, cadmium red, we'll just be using a little bit of this, alizarin crimson, also just a little bit of that. So you can put probably even less on your palette because you're just using a little bit to create a purple. Also ultramarine blue and then titanium white. So it's almost all of the colors in our kit, not quite. We will be getting there in our next few paintings, getting that full palette out here, but these are the colors that we'll need today. And then of course the solvent-free gel. You want to make sure you have that out on your palette as well. Okay, so let's begin by, we're going to begin by mixing a purple. And we are mixing a purple because we're creating, we're going to create neutrals for our yellow objects, so the lemon and the banana. And in order to do that, we're going to create the complementary color, which is purple, and we'll use that purple to neutralize the yellows. So I'm going to start by getting some ultramarine blue. Okay. And I'll mix my cooler colors over here, near my cool side of the spectrum, and my warmer colors, my yellows, over here. Okay, maybe even a little bit more blue. Alright, now I'm going to add alizarin crimson, and I'm also going to add cadmium red, because I want to warm this purple up a little bit. If you have a really blue purple, when you add that into a yellow, it's going to make it look really green. So I'm warming that up with our warm cadmium red a bit. Okay, and purples are the darkest color, so the violets, they're going to be, oh my gosh, shouting. They are going to be near the darkest end of the value scale, so kind of the closest to black. Okay, and I just want to make sure that it is fully mixing. I'm going to add maybe a tiny bit more of the cadmium red. And try to mix that in fully. So I'm really pressing through this paint pile, scraping it, lifting it back up, pushing it back down. You can see when I did that, a big smear of cadmium red that hadn't fully mixed came through. Okay, so that is fairly well mixed. Now what I'm going to do is kind of gather the paint together and organize it a bit into a pile. This will also have it stay wet a little bit longer when I have a little pile with a bit more height to it rather than being super spread out. You'll notice when your paint is really spread out, it's going to dry a bit faster. Okay, so we've mixed out our purple. Now what we're going to do, we're going to mix a yellow value strain. We're going to keep it chromatic, so yellow is a fairly warm color. Really it's right between the really warm colors like red and between blue, but it's a pretty warm color, and we don't want to we don't want to add too much white into it because that can really change the nature of the color. Yellow itself, especially this yellow, this cadmium yellow, is a very light yellow. In contrast to purple, this yellow is on the lightest end of the value scale. So in terms of colors, it's going to be closest to white. It's already very light. So this is going to be a way of lightening our yellows, this pure cadmium yellow, and keeping them chromatic, so saturated in color. Remember, when we add white into things, it cools it down, and it's going to push down the chroma. So adding white is not always the best solution to lightening the value. Sometimes you need to think more. If you're working with a warm object, the solution might instead be to add some yellow and maybe a little bit of white. So we're being a little conservative with our white. Anyway, so I'm going to start by looking at the lemon and identifying its local color. So that is, the local color is the color of the object when you have a light source on it, so that color that you see in that whole big section of direct light. So it's quite a bright yellow, so it's going to be quite a bit of cadmium. It's not pure cadmium though. I'm going to add a little bit of our yellow ochre into this and see what that looks like. Okay. And then our banana is a little less chromatic than the lemon, and it's going to be a yellow with a little bit more white in it in those direct light areas. So it's a little bit more kind of pastel-y in nature when you look at the color. It does look like a yellow with a little bit of white added to it, so we'll mix out some of those yellows in this same value strain. We'll just mix one value strain for both the lemon and the banana because they are so close in color. We'll just mix a few different lights for the banana. Okay, so I'm going to take this, and just like we've done with our grays, I'm going to use this kind of local color value to mix some lighter versions and some darker versions. So I'm going to set out some steps for myself. And let's just see if I can scoop this up a little bit more. Okay, here we go. So I'm giving myself some steps, less yellow as I go out. Okay, let's go the other direction as well. A few steps going that direction. I'm trying to wipe off as much of this paint onto the palette as possible so I can use it. Okay, and let's begin with our shadow side of the value scale. Alright, so I'm going to grab some of this purple. This purple might really overwhelm this yellow, so I may have to add some other yellows in there as well. We shall see. Let's begin. Oh, it's actually looking okay. This is very dark. So again, if you are trying to mix a neutralized version of your yellow and it ends up looking very green, that means your purple was leaning really towards blue, and that blue is mixing with the yellow and really making it look green, which is likely not what you want. You're looking more for a neutralized yellow, which is going to look kind of like a browned down yellow. So if it's going too much into the green side spectrum, then you want to add that complement, and so it's going to be red. And go for the cadmium red. You want some of that warmth is going to neutralize the green. So adding a bit of that cadmium red will do the trick. Okay, so now I have mixed this really dark neutral. This will be for some very dark sections on my yellow objects. So maybe emphasizing core shadows, and now I'll use this and mix my way up my little value scale. Okay, this could be a nice core shadow color and value. Alright, and then again, I'm just going to take what's already on my palette knife and mix my way up that value scale. So I'm always kind of controlling the way that I'm mixing my colors, where I know there's not going to be as much of this dark purple in this because there's more of this yellow, and I'm using what I've mixed here. Let's add just a touch more of the neutralized yellow. Well, actually this might work. We'll see. This could be a nice value in color for the shadow mass on your objects. Let's add a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more of this, and I'm also going to, I want to warm it up a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of this yellow ochre into there as well. Okay, so we have some nice shadow colors and values here. Of course, as you actually start to paint, you also need to gauge the colors that you've mixed out and the values as you're painting. Does it look accurate? And if you're noticing something looking off as you begin to paint, start to unpack the color and ask yourself, okay, what's going on? I probably have the right hue, the right color family, yellow, but maybe the temperature is too warm or cool. Maybe the chroma needs to be more intense, or maybe it needs to be more neutralized. Maybe the value is not dark enough. So if things look off as you're beginning to paint, start to unpack those different components of color, and that's going to help you make informed mixing decisions. Okay. So we have a couple of different lighter yellows that we're going to mix out. I'm going to start by taking, let's see, I'm going to take a bunch of this cadmium yellow and I'm going to mix that into this little step right here. So this could be for a really bright section of the lemon where it does get very chromatic and almost just like a pure cadmium yellow. There's not really that bright of a yellow on the banana though. Like I said, the banana is kind of more pastel-y, so we'll mix out a more pastel-y light yellow up here. And there are areas of intense light and highlight on the lemon, and that's going to be almost just like a pure white that you could use. So we'll actually make, let's do a little bit of yellow right there. We'll add a bunch of white into that, and that will work as our highlight for the lemon and even the banana too. That could work. Okay, now let's mix something in between. So we'll take some of what we've just made and mix that down into this step to give ourselves some different gradations to work with. Okay, that works. Alright, so now for this one, let's grab some white. We may need to add more yellow up here, we'll just have to see. Let's test it out first. Grab a little bit of that. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to add more yellow into this white one because I'm going for the local color that I'm seeing on the banana, which is kind of a lighter, more pastel-y yellow, but this is too light. So what I'm going to do is add, I'll just grab some of my cadmium yellow and then also some of my yellow ochre. Because the banana, like I said, while it's a yellow object, it's fairly chromatic. It's not super chromatic. The lemon is very chromatic. And by it being next to that lemon, you can see that it's not a super chromatic yellow. Okay, let's add a little bit more cadmium yellow. We're nearly there. Just kind of pushing and pulling this little pile. Okay, that looks nice. This is also a light yellow, but it's a little bit warmer actually, so there's a little bit more of the yellow ochre, and it's more neutralized. It has the white, and the yellow ochre is a more neutralized yellow. Okay, so two different ways of expressing light with with two different types of yellow objects. Now let's add a bunch of white into that little pile of yellow for areas of highlight. So it's almost pure white. That's for those very intense areas of highlight where it's reflecting the light source back directly. Okay, so that is mixing a chromatic yellow strain. So thinking of the right type of yellow to use is very important. The cadmium yellow is going to be a great way of lightening the yellows and keeping it chromatic. If it's not as chromatic, you can probably add a little bit of white into it. Alright, so now let's mix out the value strain for our blue bottle. So what we need to begin with is actually mixing a cooler neutral from our ultramarine blue and our burnt umber. That is what we'll be adding to our blue to get the neutralized darker shadows, just like how we added the purple into our yellow. So, and a reminder, this is still kind of based in color theory that's rooted in the color wheel. So the burnt umber, while this is brown, this brown is kind of functioning like an orange. When you add this into the blue, it neutralizes it and creates a something that's very close to black. You can essentially mix your own blacks. So that's what we're going to be using to then neutralize our blue and create the darker shadows for our blue bottle. On the blue bottle, it does get quite dark near the very bottom, and there's also parts in the neck as well that go quite dark. Blue is already a very inherently dark color, but we do have some of those parts of the shadow that go very dark and are more neutralized, so they look more like a black versus like a pure blue. So we do need that neutralizing to happen for it to read like the very dark parts of those shadows. And that kind of goes back to a thing that is fairly constant, which is that shadows tend to go more neutralized, so more towards gray, brown, black, versus the light is going to kind of show the more colorful part of the object. Okay, so we've essentially made a black from ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Now let's mix out a value scale. So I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and I'm going to maybe add the bottle is essentially just, it's almost just a pure ultramarine blue. I'm going to add a little bit of this neutral into this. Okay, and then I'm going to add some steps going both directions to make some shadows and some light. Okay, so let's just do one more darker step. So this is already very dark. Okay, so one more darker step right there. And then several lighter steps. Okay, like that. So let's start with getting some of that neutral. And this is going to be so dark that it's probably quite difficult to see just on your palette. So that basically just looks like black, but the bottom of the bottle does go very dark. This neutral that we've mixed as well, you can use this to address your occlusion shadows on the bottom of the objects where they're on top of that white surface. So we can also mix out, we will also mix out a cool value strain to address the background on the tabletop. Okay, that's for our shadow. Alright, and blue is a cool color. Titanium white has a cooling effect when you add it into another color. But if you're adding that to a cool color, it's not going to change the nature of the color dramatically, so it is totally worry-free to be adding white into blue like this. It's not going to be like with our warm colors where it can really change the way that the color reads. So mix out your value scale, just using white as the lightning thing. If you add cadmium yellow, it is going to create a very different color. It's going to create green, obviously. So don't apply this same thing that's happening within the yellows and the warm colors to the blue. Blue is cool. Titanium white has a cooling effect. Cool and cool work together. It's when you start to have a cool and a warm go together that it's going to start to make a different kind of effect. Okay, and that especially applies if you're trying to mix something that is chromatic. If you're trying to mix something that looks really pastel-y, it's not really a worry. Okay, now let's grab a little bit of this. Add it into this last little pile. Let's add a little bit more blue into here. I'm going to add a little bit more pure ultramarine blue into here, trying to get the color and the value of the bulk of that bottle. That's much closer, so nice. And I'm actually going to take a little bit of this and adjust this step because these are looking way too close to each other. Alright, there we go. Okay, so now I have a value scale for my blue object. Okay, that leaves the cork, which is it's going to be basically this neutral again, but leaning towards the brown, and then also the white tabletop and background, which we'll just do as a cool gray. So you already have experience mixing these by this point, but I will mix it out for you all to see now. However, if you feel comfortable, you could exit the video now, or you can watch this neutral again if you want to see this mixing a warm and cool neutral. Okay, let's make that a little bit cooler, so a little bit more ultramarine blue. Alright, so we're going to mix out a couple steps, starting with the middle gray, and I will customize it. Start here. I'm going to go lighter towards this side since I have my darker version up here. It's a little bit different from these other things, but I can reference the values of the things that I'm mixing out right here. Okay. So again, you don't always have to mix out like a complete 10-point value scale like we did for our value scales project. You just want to give yourself a variety of values to be working with, between 5 to 10. just depending on what you're seeing as well and what you need as you paint. Okay. Let's get the lighter end in here. Alright, let me mix my way up. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna adjust this one a little bit so it's not so close to that one. That looks better. So as you're mixing out these value scales, compare the values you're mixing. If two look too similar to each other, make an adjustment. So you have to be just kind of constantly gauging what you're doing and analyzing it. So even if you're following my demo very closely, you're probably going to make slightly different choices, or you might be putting a little bit more of one type of color into your mixture. So you have to be learning to unpack color and value yourself as well, even as you're following these demos. You have to actively be thinking. Okay, so I have a value strain that addresses my yellow object. I have a value strain that addresses my tabletop and background. I have a value strain that addresses my blue object. Now I just need a couple values for that cork, which is a warmer brown. So I'm going to grab some of this neutral, a little bit of that, and I'm going to add also some of the cool neutral. And I'm going to add more of this burnt umber in here. I need to get a little bit more onto my palette. Okay. And it's kind of a fairly warm brown, so I'm actually not just going to use white. I will use white to lighten it, but I'm also going to use a little bit of yellow ochre. Okay, so let's grab some of this, make some steps, and I'm going to try adding yellow ochre in here. Quite well. Alright. And I'm also going to take some of this brown and make a brown with some white in it as well, because I'll probably be addressing the cork with a combination of both this more warm light that I warmed up the yellow ochre, and also this one, which it has white in it, so it is a cooler brown. Okay, so that is it for the mixing demo. That I have value strains that address all of my major colors. If I need to, I can go back and mix out more variations, but this should get you through the majority of your painting. Again, to mix these shadows, I'm thinking back to the color wheel. I'm combining complements to create the shadows and the darker end of the value scale. I'm asking myself, what is this color behaving like? If it's a warmer color, I'm not just instantly adding white into it to lighten it, because I have to think about the color's chroma and how to actually capture that chroma. So on the lemon, for example, it's a more chromatic yellow. The cadmium yellow is going to express that really well, and it's going to be very light and still chromatic. The banana is a little bit different. It's a little bit more pastel-y, so adding more white into that is okay. The blue is a cool object, and the titanium white has a cooling effect. Adding white to that is really no problem. But I'm still just, I'm considering these individual colors, asking myself what they're behaving like, and that is informing my mixing decisions. Okay, as always, feel free to email me if you have any questions, and good luck with the mixing and have fun painting.